Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Seat Time, Senate Bill 2196 in Mastery Learning. We're grateful to be with you here today. My name is Levi Bachmeyer. I am the business manager for West Fargo Schools, formerly with the North Dakota Governor's Office, and here with some outstanding leaders and educators in North Dakota. Dr. Steiner, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Corey Steiner. I'm the superintendent for the Northern Cass School District, and I look forward to speaking and sharing with you today, and I'll turn it over to Ann.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Ellison. I'm the Director of Academic Support in the Department of Public Instruction, and we're very excited to be here today to illustrate how Senate Bill 2196 can work for you in your schools and districts. Levi, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Ann. So we're going to jump right in. We know time is short and we have a lot of ground to cover. So as you can see on this next slide, where does this conversation about mastery learning begin in North Dakota? And just, I think it's important to start with some terms. Personalized competency-based learning, mastery learning. We'll do our best to break down what each of these individualized terms mean. But really, when we take a step back and look about why we're here and what we're trying to do, this is about forwarding personalized competency-based learning for every student in North Dakota. We know that this Senate Bill 2196 isn't the only initiative that is targeting and trying to move this really important initiative to better personalize the educational experience of kids forward. This is just one that we know is big and really believe in the potential that it has to positively impact student learning. So again, this is not a monopoly on innovation, but just one of many various efforts that are happening across the state, across the country. We know that innovation is a mindset. It's not a specific project. And that every community, every school leader defines innovation differently. But ultimately, every community knows the needs of their students best, the needs of their community. And really, just as we look at this work of how do we create opportunities for students to graduate choice ready with both the knowledge and the skills that they need to succeed in today's workforce, that's really why we're here and why we're so excited to be continuing these conversations, knowing that they're going to look a little bit different at every level. And I think that's really one of the reasons why Governor Burgum back in 2017 was so passionate about establishing a task force to really dive into this question and try to better peel back some of the layers about what is innovation in education and what do our schools need, what do our teachers need, what do our students need to best unlock the potential of each and every student. Knowing that our economy is rapidly evolving, and this was before the COVID pandemic. And so I think it's really focused on taking a hard look at where are we in the state of North Dakota, what do we need to do to continue to ensure that we are best in the nation in providing an education to kids. Gallup poll a few years ago ranked North Dakota as one of the highest, not the highest, states in the nation when determining by parents whether schools were good or excellent. And while we were very pleased to come out at the top, we saw that as a challenge to get better and to better serve our kids, and not that it's a signal that what we're doing should stay the same, because we know the needs of our kids right now is far different than those needs were a year ago. And so we're just really continually trying to move this forward when we talk about innovation. And so the governor had established this Innovative Education Task Force in September of 2017 with the goal of all the things that I had mentioned, knowing that innovation is a locally derived term. How do we better support all school districts on a systemic level as we try to better move towards more personalized competency-based learning for all kids? So as you can see on the next slide here, it was a massive undertaking, several meetings over the course of a full year. Dr. Steiner was one of those leading members of the committee. Superintendent Baszler from DPI was also an invaluable contributor. People from all over the state, superintendents, teachers, we had private sector individuals, and we really tried to put together a holistic team of people who care about education, who work in education, and who know firsthand what we need from graduates as they conclude their senior year and hopefully move forward in a choice-ready fashion to embrace whatever life is going to throw at them. And through the course of site visits and conversations, we saw the committee come to a consensus on a variety of topics. But the one that stood out above all of the others was the need to provide more flexibility when it comes to graduation requirements. We have a model, the Carnegie model, that's based on credits, which were based on seat time, which was originally used to determine a way to ensure that college professors were adequately pensioned. And so the credit system has served us well for a long time, but as we move forward beyond just a purely knowledge economy, we know that we need to look a little bit at the credit system a little differently and a little bit more holistically. And so on the next slide, we had to deal with, so now what do? We know that the task force has identified that looking at the collection of credits for high school students needs to be more flexible than the traditional course-based, seat time-based model. We knew what the task force wanted, and then we had to ask ourselves some hard questions. So what are we going to do to get there? I need to point out that throughout all of this work, DPI, Superintendent Baszler, and numerous other school leaders across the state had been engaging with KnowledgeWorks separately as part of a 5-year commitment to help design personalized competency-based learning opportunities for students. They started with up to 5 districts from across the state, are working with 4 currently, and we're asking many of the same questions. And so it became apparent as the task force was doing its work, how can these efforts collaborate and coordinate with one another in a more systemic way. And so we found out over time that as part of the KnowledgeWorks partnership, a learning continuum was looking to be established. And so some conversations then ensued about, so if we begin to have a conversation about what do students need to succeed in the 21st century, what are the academic skills as defined by our state standards? We know those have been worked on and honed and are continually reviewed on a regular basis. We know what that looks like. But when we think about 21st century education, not just learning things, especially when we think about all the information that's readily available at our fingertips on our cell phone, what are some of the key skills that we want students to be able to graduate with, so we know that they're equipped to succeed? And so began an additional effort to bring together stakeholders, over 50, again, inside education, outside of education, private sector, public sector, religious leaders, business leaders, to ask this question. If we begin at a fundamental level, and we know that every community is going to define these different, but when we talk about North Dakota, what are some of those key skills that we want our students to graduate confident that they have mastered and know how to implement in whatever they're choosing to do? And so again, over the course of several months, this next working group tried to identify what those key skills are. And ultimately, they identified these 7 dispositions that I personally think are great. They're holistic. They capture the direction and abilities that we want our students to have. And so we ended up in a place where we knew that we had a framework to identify those key academic abilities that we wanted students to be able to demonstrate. And now we had great insight into some of the key dispositions and skills we wanted to have our students able to master and able to articulate, because I think as we move forward into a skill-based educational system that blends both knowledge and skills, students need to be able to visibly speak to the learning that we're doing. And I think that this profile of a graduate, again, just a starting point, both for the state and for individual districts, just helps us move along that continuum of being able to really thoughtfully articulate what students are graduating able to do. And so if you move to this next slide, so now what I think is the question that someone might be asking. So you did this task force, they identified the need for flexibility when it comes to graduation requirements. We know that there's this partnership with KnowledgeWorks that want to do a learning continuum. We know that a separate working group had put together this profile of a graduate. So it sounds like a lot of working groups and a lot of action, but what does this mean for kids in North Dakota? What this means for kids in North Dakota is Senate Bill 2196. And so legislative leaders, you can see 6 of them on the screen there, the 3 senators and 3 representatives that were the prime sponsors of the bill, talked to educational leaders, talked to people working on this problem. This wasn't just limited to the Innovative Education Task Force. This comes from conferences. This comes from conversations. This comes from those infrequent collisions between educators who are constantly asked this question: how do we better serve kids? And so 2196 was the culmination of those conversations, all of those work groups that I talked about, and really it boiled down to a couple very simple things. Going to be complicated to execute, but pretty simple in their concept. The first is the state recognized this work that's being done to establish a learning continuum as an important part of moving towards competency-based, personalized learning for students. The second is it identified and empowered school districts to develop mastery framework policies to take that state level learning continuum and essentially create a wiring framework, if you will, to tie that into the required courses and credits for graduation. So if we jump to the next slide, we can kind of put this in a more historical context. So we all kind of know this flow chart pretty well. The state works collaboratively with stakeholders to identify standards. Districts then assemble the courses, the syllabus, the resources, the curriculum needed to meet those standards. And then at the successful completion of those courses, which have traditionally been based on completion, think about grades, as well as seat time, 50 minutes for a semester. Ultimately, if students had the successful amount of seat time and successfully completed the academic requirements, they were rewarded a credit. And so when we talk about what this means, think about it in that regard. And so what we're trying to do is create an equal path, not better, not worse, but an equal path, an additional path for people to think about this differently that doesn't focus so heavily on seat time. So as opposed to it just being our state standards, we'll have the learning continuum, which is a combination of both that rigorous academic content along with those 21st century skills serving as the building blocks of this personalized competency-based learning opportunity for kids. Then districts will then identify of those building blocks in the learning continuum, which of those do we feel are most essential to ensure that a student has mastery of a science credit, of a social studies credit, of an English credit. And they'll work, I say wiring and think about it in a way of picking those building blocks and connecting those individual blocks with wires ultimately to the credit that they are going to award their student upon successful completion. And I think that does a couple things. Most notably, it moves away from seat time requirements. We're not measuring how long a kid is seated in a seat. And the other thing that it does is it provides much more flexibility when we talk about what does it mean to earn a credit. Does it have to be in a single class with a single teacher? Can it look different? Can it happen outside of the classroom? Can it happen under the facilitation and support of multiple teachers? I think the opportunity here is just incredible to think about what can learning look like when we provide the flexibility to our experts, and those are our educators working every day in the field, to take those core fundamental building blocks in our learning continuum, find a way to do that wiring through their mastery framework policy, and ultimately reward credits based on those proficiencies, that competency-based learning that we continue to talk about. This is an actual tangible way to provide flexibility to our schools and to our kids to ensure that they have the best educational experience possible. And so that's a little bit on the history and the mechanics of 2186. Now to talk a little bit about what this could actually look like in schools with teachers and with kids, would be delighted to turn it over to Dr. Steiner.
Thank you, Levi. I appreciate that greatly. As we think about what this can look like in action in the school districts, I'm going to share a little bit from the perspective of Northern Cass and some of the work we've done earlier and some of the work we've identified going forward to use Senate Bill 2196 to better meet the needs of our learners in our school district, but also hopefully to provide a framework that can be used statewide. Levi shared about the portrait of a graduate, and I will reinforce how important that concept is. I don't believe you can even tackle 2196 or begin to do that work if you don't know and you aren't crystal clear about the skills and dispositions your learners need to have when they walk out of your building after they graduate. We know what courses they need to have for graduation. We understand the knowledge they need to have, but when we talk disposition and skills, that is really talking about engaging your community in that conversation. The dispositions that somebody from Northern Cass needs when they graduate to be in Cass County may be very well different than in McKenzie County and Wofford City and Williston. So it's really important to understand your unique culture and your unique needs in your area. And so on here, I showed the possible North Dakota dispositions, and Levi shared that, and I'll reiterate there too. That was a huge grouping from learners to the business community to higher ed to K-12, who really met and worked through during closure to figure out what those dispositions could be. Ours we had designed a few years earlier, but I thought it was very interesting. If you look at those, they really aren't all that different. So what we think from Northern Cass is we're not willing to give up our dispositions. Our community was very vested in building those. Our learners understand them. Our educators know them. But what we know is we can use the learning continuum work and help improve what we have down for our dispositions and how we're going to assess whether they're successful or not. And I will also say we have now defined very clear proficiency scales with our dispositions, and we've begun to link those and ingrain those in our coursework. And now we're starting to have conversations about how can we use the legislation in 1478, which is the Learn Everywhere bill or Learn Anywhere bill, to be able to provide credit for learners outside of the Learning Center. And as we transition into the next slide, I want to share something that's very exciting and going on right now in the state. And it's a small group of schools, Midway, Rugby, New Rockford, Northern Cass, Solon, Marmot, which is a youth correctional center, and Jamestown, who have been working with a group called Mastery Transcript Consortium. And Mastery Transcript is a organization, a nonprofit, that has believed the traditional transcript with grades and GPA and class rank really is not an indication of what a learner has learned, nor what they're able to bring to an organization. And that means higher ed, military, or the workforce. By representing knowledge and skills and dispositions through evidence, it actually allows the story of a learner to be told very intimately. It tells who they are, what they've learned, how they've grown into the person they are, and who they want to become. And with this evidence that's put into the system where educators are to review that, you actually get this very personal relationship that is built. And this relationship leads to coaching for growth for our learners. So when they do leave your school system, the one thing you can guarantee is they have acquired these dispositions that you've identified in your portrait of a graduate. It's important to understand, though, this is a big shift. And the shift is the transcript doesn't include percentage grades. It doesn't include letter grades. It doesn't include a GPA. It includes evidence of the skills that learner has obtained and acquired throughout their secondary education. Now, I know a lot of people instantly say, oh my gosh, that's great, but colleges won't accept it. Mastery Transcripts has colleges around the country that have already begun accepting these transcripts and working with them. We spent time at multiple college campuses last year with Northern Cass talking through this with our higher ed institutions and figuring out how can we make this work. If the ACT continues to remain optional, there will need to be other ways to represent knowledge other than a traditional transcript that we've used for so long. And I also want you to understand that when we talk evidence, please don't just think of this as, oh, they took a test, so I'm going to have them upload the test, and that's your evidence. We're talking any evidence. So this could be projects, it could be papers, it could be community service, it could be them and things they've done teaching Sunday school or in confirmation. It could be them being a captain of the basketball team. Evidence is anything that demonstrates their acquisition of the skills that you've identified as necessary for graduation. And so as we think about that, I want to talk on our next slide about what are some of the things you could do, because this is overwhelming and you don't have to be a district that's been on the front edge of competency-based personalized learning to start thinking and doing this work. And so I want to share some things that we've done at Northern Cass, but it's also things that I know are being done at schools throughout the state that are ways to get this work started. So the first thing is that I'd really challenge people to think about internships and job shadows. Almost every school district has job shadows going on. I think a vast majority have internships, whether you call it school to work, whether it's teaching assistants, you have these things going on in your district. And I would challenge you to stop thinking about those as here's the amount of hours they have to get credit, to start thinking about how will you ask them to demonstrate the skills in that authentic learning experience to demonstrate their learning. and what is the evidence you can gather for that. That leads into capstones. There's lots of school districts doing this work. A capstone can be a couple different things. For us, we've given learners two choices. One is a culminating presentation where they will demonstrate evidence of their learning and acquisition of our portrait of a graduate dispositions. The other is them identifying an action research project that they will take on throughout their senior year and eventually present on that. This year we had one learner start a business and sell their artwork. We had another learner write a book. It can be something that is very personal to them. It is our job to coach them and assist them and provide resources, but it is mainly their role to explore their passions. Our educators assess that. Learners, we have board members come, community members who also assess. They get to invite family members, and it's really turned into this culminating event of a celebration of what a learner has done and who they have become. I'll also say there have been many times over the years we've done this where learners have to redo parts of their dispositions. We've never held anyone from graduation, but we will tell them, your evidence doesn't support a learner's mindset. We need you to go back and reflect, work with our coaches, and come back and represent in 2 weeks. They know it's serious, they take it serious, and it has really become what I would consider one of the gold star moments in our district. Now, the last piece of this before I turn it over to Ann is, if you're struggling, you say, we don't have capstones, we don't have the internship. Every one of us are responsible for getting our learners to choice ready. It's one of our metrics for accountability in the state of North Dakota. So if you're struggling with a place to start taking a look at the choice ready indicators, look at the resources that are out there, and you can start to do this work around college, career, and military, which gives you a nice starting point, a foundation, because every district is doing this work. And basically it gives you no reason to not start doing this work as soon as the rules and regulations are set and put forth. So I'll turn it over to Ann and let her talk about the department's role and what they're looking for.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Levi. Yes, the Department of Public Instruction has been challenged with this Senate Bill 2196 and making a lot of the logistical elements of what this looks like in a school and district. How do we bring that to reality? So we are in the process of identifying the framework for our learning continuum design. That process will get us to the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that will be expected for all learners across North Dakota. And as Corey just said, it aligns directly with Choice Ready and especially those 21st century skills, as well as college, career, and military ready. So when we say competencies, we are looking at those cross-cutting elements that are relevant to a student's real world, real life work, and they can be demonstrated over a period of time across multiple contexts, multiple disciplines. As Levi said, maybe multiple educators, multiple teachers, or even learning that happens outside of the traditional classroom. As North Dakota designs its learning continuum, we have some core objectives that we wanted to ensure that we would meet. First was we wanted to convene North Dakota educators from across the state, ensuring coverage on all four corners of North Dakota, bring those minds of educators, those people that are closest to this level of work with students together to articulate what this means in North Dakota. We'll do some work in calibrating those understandings, whether it be around the vocabulary, the design processes, the core elements of our North Dakota learning continuum. Ultimately, this group will write kindergarten through post-secondary grade-banded competencies for science, social studies, English language arts, and the 21st century skills, or the profile of a graduate dispositions for North Dakota. We will have a feedback and a review process and cycle to ensure that all voices from North Dakota have a place and space to be represented. And with that, we'll make revisions as needed and ultimately have a published rough draft, a solid plan of what North Dakota's learning continuum and these competencies look like. So all of that work, we actually we started planning some of this in 2020, just what that structure, what the field would look like. It will be a virtual design process. That was decided pretty much during last year in the summer, that as we go forward, we'll need to figure out how to do this virtually. Applications for the committee selection have been in place since this spring, when Senate Bill 2196 really got its feet on the ground and moved forward. Our ultimate committee selection was determined in May, and we'll be gathering our first set of designers in the areas of social studies and English language arts, as well as some of those 21st century skills. That will happen here the last week of June. Round 2 of our competency design in math, science, and then those remaining profile of a graduate or 21st century skills will be designed that last week of July. Then in the fall, in October and prior to that, we will have a public feedback and review process where educators or people from the field, maybe workforce ready, or parents and students want to provide feedback on the learning continuum in that process. There'll be a venue and avenue for that. Ultimately, the approval, publish, and sharing, we aim to have that ready by winter of 2021. Senate Bill 2196 provided the authority for the state superintendent to facilitate the development and collaboration with career and technical education regarding the North Dakota Learning Continuum. So under State Superintendent Baszler's direction, I am the person in DPI leading much of this work in partnership with Knowledge Work and many schools and districts across North Dakota. Although our design team has been selected, there are opportunities for public comment. We will have in August, September-ish, we'll have a news release that goes out where there will be this information posted on our website, as well as some type of a format, such as a survey or a poll for public insight and feedback on the North Dakota Learning Continuum. Additionally, if you are interested in participating, we are welcoming all applicants to be considered for an October 6th review event. So we'll have to limit that application once those come in, but you could represent yourself as a general K-12 educator, higher education, or a community member or stakeholder interested in this process. The information and website where this is housed will be posted at the end of this presentation today. After the state superintendent has a solid rough draft, it will then go to the K-12 Coordination Council for review and feedback and recommendations that will all be considered by the North Dakota State Board of Public Education, and they have the ultimate authority to establish and certify a North Dakota Learning Continuum. Now you'll notice that the design cycle mentioned on this, that yellow arrow that exists, this is not a once and done process. Just like our content standards in North Dakota, they're reviewed and revisited on a regular cycle. The North Dakota Learning Continuum that we will have for the winter of 2021 is our solid first draft. We will continue to have a revision and a review process on a regular basis to ensure that we always have something that's current and relevant for our districts, schools, and students of North Dakota. So you may be asking yourself, well, what do we need in our school or district in order to make 2196 actionable? So the state law requires a local school district to have an approved mastery framework. And if you think back to Levi's slides, how we had courses plus standards that would equal your credits. In this design, you have your learning continuum that is batched into your mastery framework. What do your students in your local district need to do? How do they need to experience it? What does it need to be documented? And with that, you can issue a mastery credit. So think of that mastery framework as your wiring element. How are you wiring that student learning experience ultimately to your graduation expectations in your school and district? So having that mastery framework in place allows you to waive that traditional seat time requirement or instructional time requirement for your students. You need to note that it must be aligned to the North Dakota learning continuum that is under production and being designed. It also has to identify those portions of the learning continuum that need to be identified for mastery in your local school and district in order for graduation. So keep all of those elements in mind. If a local school district were going to pursue this, we'd encourage you to start with some key questions. So as Corey mentioned, have you consulted with your stakeholders? What are those core elements and beliefs that your community has regarding learning and the products they want of their public school? How are you going to document that student learning? What type of portfolio or what type of evidence might be collected? What does satisfactory look like in a school or district? How about your educators? What types of supports? How are we going to get them on board with this new type of education, new type of learning or demonstration of learning? What does the system transition look like? Do we take it step by step? What is our timeline? What are our local goals? And how does our community feel about those goals? And lastly, what is our plan for communication and messaging? Because as you are all aware, our communities, our stakeholders, so many are champions behind what we do in our schools and districts. We want to ensure that they are on board and with us the entire way through this process. So with that, I'd like to thank Levi Bachmeyer from the West Fargo Public Schools, Dr. Corey Steiner from Northern Cass, and myself. If you have questions, please reach out to any of us. We will gladly answer those questions. Our contact information is on the slide. And if you'd like to learn more about the North Dakota Learning Continuum design and development process, you can visit the DPI website at nd.gov/DPI and scroll on down to Harvesting Innovation, and you'll find a tab specifically for the Learning Continuum design and development. Levi, Corey, thank you for joining me today, and everyone, enjoy the Governor's Summit. Thank you.